Hi folks, I thought I'd give you a brief garden update. It's been a while since I have. You can see I've started to pick some things. Some wax beans and the green beans have just started. Lots of cherry tomatoes are starting to come in now, and this is just my recent day's picking of the pickling cucumbers. I'll show you all of these in just a second here. So the last time I showed you the tomato plants, they were maybe 2 feet high or so. Well, you can see what they now look like. They've all grown very, very well. And you can see the rows there. The cherry tomatoes are down on the end of this row. These are larger, meatier varieties here, and then I have some slicing tomatoes over there. We've had, since I spoke to you last on the garden, we've had a lot of rain and a lot of heat. When I first planted these things, I started watering them right away because it was so dry the end of May, the beginning of June. It was just so dry I had to keep them irrigated so that they wouldn't die. And that led to some other things being late getting started, because even though I had seed in the ground, it didn't grow because it was so dry. But we've more than made up for that now as we're at the end of July. And we've had so much rain here that I haven't had to water anything. And for some of the crops it's been great, like the tomatoes here. But for others there's actually been too much rain. Some of them have kind of become blighted looking because they're getting too much rain and not enough nutrients with it, I guess. I'm not sure. But these are how the tomato plants are doing. As you can see, there are lots of little green ones on there, and some bigger ones as well. They are doing very well as far as the growth goes. And these are, I think these are all big boys here, or super steaks. I'm not sure, but they're growing very nicely. You can see them there. There's going to be a while yet, of course, because they do take a while to grow. But as I said, the cherry tomatoes are coming in. This was the most I've ever picked at a time. I have six plants. I had a lot on there that were green for a long time, and they just didn't want to ripen, but now they've started. This year, though, the thing that's just exploding for me are the pickling cucumber vines. I have six hills that I put here, or 6 plants, I should say, that I put here. I bought the seedlings at the nursery and put them in here. And this one, of course, since it's close to where my wife dumps the straw and the chicken manure out, is just going crazy. In fact, it's climbing up the garden fence here at a couple places. I've also had with some of these others to keep pulling them away from the tomato plants. They want to crawl over and climb around the tomato plants. My wife has made, I think, 6 batches of various kinds of pickles already with them. Still have a lot of blossoms, and there's a lot more to go here. So this has been a year, and other people have told me the same thing around here, that their pickling cucumbers have been unbelievable. So it's a good year for it, which is great, because the last few years I've had a lot of blight in the cucumbers, and I just didn't get what we wanted. Here's another problem we've had this summer. My shadow get there. That little hole in the ground there, that was a ground nest of yellow jackets. I noticed it the other day. Thank God I didn't get stung when I was out here working. But that thing's about almost 2.5, 3 inches in diameter. So I don't know how many were in there. It went way down. But what I did is I waited till at night, long after dark, and I just got my wasp and hornet and yellow jacket spray and just sprayed it down the hole and kept spraying and spraying until it foamed up. And then I did it the next night again. So far I think I got all of them. But they're nasty, nasty, nasty. And the yellow jackets, if they're in the ground, it's easy to get stung because you don't notice them, and they're miserable. Okay, let me show you some of the other things. I have, because of all the rain, the weeding has been next to impossible here. Can't get the tiller in, even to get into hand weed and stuff. The ground was so wet, so saturated, that I had to put rubber boots on and sink down 2 inches in the mud, and I just didn't want to do that. But as you can see, there's been a lot of weed growth. This is just a small patch of popcorn that I planted. I wasn't really expecting too much to come from this, but if we get a few cobs of popcorn, great. And then more in the tomatoes. Here you can see the cherry tomatoes along here. They're going to be, these were the Sweet 100s, where they have this, as you can see here, they kind of have this whole strip of tomatoes. It's just not one tomato per stalk. It's like they're clustered, almost like, not quite grapes, but similar. And they're heavy producers, so I like them for that reason. And I've had to spend a lot of time, and I have more yet to do today, tying up plants as they've grown, because they've all wanted to flop over. And of course, if the tomatoes or the plants are on the ground, you get more early blight, and I've been battling some of that. I've sprayed once, and I should spray again. What I've been trying to do is, as I am picking or checking, is if I see some branches that are blighted, I'll just break them off. Usually they're the low ones near the ground. Anytime, I was told, anytime that you have a wet season, you're going to have early blight. There's no way around it. So just do the best you can. There are a couple of chemicals you can get, copper fungicide, and I forget what the other one is, just at your local, like Tractor Supply or Lowe's or wherever. So some of the problems here, because of the extra rain, we planted a few eggplants. They're not doing real great. They were kind of blighted before when we had a lot of the heavier rains before. Everything seemed to just be too much. And this broccoli, I don't know why it's sort of blighted too. Maybe it was just too wet here for it. The ones on the far end, I'll show you when I walk over there, they did better, but down this way, this batch, and these were planted from seedlings, they weren't from seed. The peppers, these are red sweet peppers. They're all doing fairly well. I'm getting peppers on them now, and typically when I plant peppers, they just kind of sit there for most of the summer. Then we start to get towards the end of the summer, and then they start producing peppers. So we're just getting into the main phase with them. I think they'll be okay. I just have to, when I can get in here now, we're going to have a dry, cooler week, but with sun. So maybe I can get in here with the tiller and the hoe better and get some weeding done. This broccoli has still given me trouble. It wants to be sort of blighted, and I don't know why. I don't know if it's just because of the too much rain. You can see there's one head starting on this one, but that's the first one, and I'm hoping that as the season goes on, it'll recover a bit more. I planted a row of wax beans here. As you can see, the weeds took over pretty quickly. I have pulled a couple pints of beans off of it already, so that's okay. I mean, the wax beans were just an afterthought. They weren't my main beans, because I'm doing this trellising of pole beans. Let me walk along here and show you. I just started picking some green beans today. Down on the end there was one or two plants that they were mature on, but as you can see how well they've grown. Now remember, all of these started just as seeds down along the ground below the trellises, and they're blue lake, but instead of the bush beans, they're the pole bean variety. So they put out the tendrils, and then they climb up, and some of these are wrapping around each other a dozen times, and they've gotten to the top of the trellis and they don't know where to go. So, and as you can see, there are just hundreds and hundreds of blossoms on there. So I'm thinking over the next 2 weeks I'm going to have plenty of green beans. They're holding up pretty well. There's a little bit of insect damage and a little bit of blight, but I try to stay away from doing too much spraying, especially you can't when your plants have blossoms on, because if you spray for other bugs, you're going to kill the bees too, the pollinating bees, the honey bees, the other kinds of bees, and you definitely don't want to do that. So it's something you got to deal with. What I have done in the past with the bush beans, if they're not blossomed yet and I start to have insect damage, I get 7 powder and just sprinkle it on lightly on the leaves, and that seems to deal with it. But it has to be done long before you get any kind of blossoms, or you're asking for trouble, because you're going to kill off your pollinators, and you just don't want to do that. I've seen honeybees here in the clover in the yard, so there must be some hives or some wild honeybees around somewhere. I don't have any, and I'm not sure where, but we want to protect them. We want to protect those pollinators. We really need them to have good gardens. So as you can see here, I'm just continuing down the trellis row here, that everything is looking pretty good considering. And they survived the extra rain, I think, fairly well. There's some weeding I need to get in here and do, but and then over here we've got my potato patch. All these lower green plants here you see, those are all potato plants. The emergence was pretty good considering I just used some old potatoes that I had left over from last year for some of it. I bought some seed potatoes, but the rest I just threw in. My wife even gave me a bag that was half empty that we didn't use in the house. It started to sprout eyes. She said, here, go plant those too. So we'll see what we get. Most of these have already gone through their blossom phase, which is good. You want them to blossom. Now what happens next, and this one I don't think that's just blight. I think it's getting to the point where it's ready to die. They dry up and then they die, and that's what you want, because you can't really harvest your potatoes. So you can see here's one that's still in blossom. You can't harvest your potatoes until the surface plant dies off if you want good sized potatoes. You can see there's another blossom there, but they're doing pretty well. There's some weeds in here. I know that I tried to get more hay down to try to choke out everything. Didn't quite work again this year, but it's better because the patch here, you can still see all the potato plants there shading everything else out. So I'm guessing that underneath all that growth, in about maybe a month or so, when they're all dead and I get in there and I start pushing back the hay, I'm going to see some pretty nice potatoes. We'll see. I will do a video on it when we get to that point. This part of the garden has onions in it, believe it or not. But again, I didn't get enough hay, I guess, down to choke out the weeds. And I'm afraid to start pulling weeds out now for fear I'm going to be pulling up onions. So I'm just going to leave this the way it is. The onions are going to do what they're going to do, and then I'll get them out. It's just, onions aren't a big crop for me. It's just something to plant to try, and it's a supplement to buying onions. You can see there's some there that look like they're doing fairly well. And I'll have to see when they need to be harvested, so I don't want to pull them out prematurely. But I have a couple varieties of onions in there, sweet, white, and purple onions. So we'll see what I get out of that. There are actually more in there than you can see from all the weeds. So, but again, that's this garden, and this is where we are. Like I said, about a month and a half since I did the last video. You can see what growth I've had. Hopefully, if I have a good week this week, I can get rid of most of these weeds finally, and then we'll have a push through August for the rest of the crops to really start producing. I know I'm going to be getting into tomato harvesting and tomato canning and spaghetti sauce making. My wife will be doing that over the next month. Probably within 2 weeks it'll be big time green beans. And the cucumbers, I don't know how long they're going to keep giving. I think she's about finished wanting to make pickles, so I don't know if we'll start giving some away or what we'll do with them. But I'm just thankful that they worked out this year, whereas last 2 or 3 years they blighted before I really got much of anything. So I'm happy for that this year, and we'll see what happens. Now again, I'm just showing you what I do. I'm not trying to be Joe Better Homes and Gardens here to show you something perfect and well manicured and stuff. I mean, I know this isn't something you'd put on the cover of a magazine, but I don't care. I'm just raising food for my family. If I have to deal with weeds, I try to do the best I can with it. I don't want to overspray. I don't want to do any kind of damage to the wildlife if I can help it. I'm not strictly organic, of course, but I'm just trying to produce things as best I can without a whole lot of hassle. And the big thing with the tomatoes has certainly helped. This is the second year now I've done it with the newspapers and mulch and then trellising them. You can see there are almost no weeds growing in among those tomatoes. That's excellent. Even though it takes me a whole lot more time to tie them up, I'm still not spending anywhere near as much time with trying to deal with the weeding and dealing with cages flopping over and all that kind of thing. It's a whole lot easier to just tie the branches up as they come. And if I can keep them off the ground, the tomatoes have got plenty of air around them, they'll be healthy. So we'll see what happens. Again, I recommend the trellising for anybody who's interested in growing a bunch of tomato plants, or even if you don't have as many. This system seems to work out well. Again, it's my second year and they're looking good again. And well, I'll give you a wrap up later in the summer when I'm starting to pick some of the big varieties. So thank you for watching. I'll probably give you a quick look at the upper garden in the second part of this video. There isn't as much to see there because that was all planted later, and the weed situation there is pretty bad too. So let me come back to you on that. Well, here I am at the upper garden. If you remember, I have the solar powered electric fence here to try to keep the deer out of this one. I'm not so worried about the rabbits. With the stuff I plant here, they don't bother much of this stuff, but the deer would have a field day on the corn and some of the squash if I'd let it. So let me just turn off my electric fence here. We'll step in. I planted 7 hills, of pumpkins here. This garden was planted very late because it was so dry that the ground here was so hard. It was next to impossible to even till it. My Alice is down, so I couldn't plow. And with the tiller, in order to get just like one row like this soft enough to be plantable, I'd have to run the tiller back and forth through here no less than 8 times. I mean, that's incredible that it was that hard. It was like trying to till asphalt. But that's what happens with clay when it gets that dry. Eventually it broke it up enough that it became more powdery, but so it took me well into maybe the first week of June to get things planted, and then it was a little while till we got some rain till it started to grow. So everything's late. Whether I'll get pumpkins here or not, I don't know. I have blossoms now, so I'm happy. The next thing in this jungle here, this was 4 rows of nectar sweet corn, and you can see some of them have come up very nicely, but there's so many weeds here, and they're just, in fact, this row I was so covered with weeds 3 weeks or so ago. I don't know, it's still in June, I guess, yet. I just tilled it all under and replanted it, but you can see what's come up. There are a couple stalks of corn, but I think the mistake I made, maybe some of you who garden more can tell me, I started trying to push the growth in the corn by planting granular fertilizer with it when I planted the seeds. Recommendation was 10-10-10. So what I would do is I'd cut my little furrow to put the seeds in, and then a couple inches over from it I'd run the planter kind of blade to cut a second furrow, and then I just sprinkle the fertilizer into it and cover it up. You don't want to put the fertilizer right on top of the seeds. It could burn them, but you want it to be close. But what I think happened was the fertilizer being in the ground, the weeds got an early start on the corn and were able to kind of choke it out. I'm thinking that maybe planting pre-emerge or sowing pre-emerge fertilizer isn't the way to go with the sweet corn, at least for me here. Maybe I would be better off to wait until, just plant the sweet corn, let it come up, get it up a good, I don't know, 6 inches a foot high, and then do what they call side dressing of fertilizer, or post-emerge. Use the same fertilizer the same way, just put it next to it. But if the corn's already rooted and growing well, maybe it'll absorb more of the fertilizer before the weeds can. I don't know. I'm stumped with this. I'm still hesitant to use a herbicide for sweet corn. It's hard to find that kind of stuff, and I just don't know what I'm doing with it, so I don't want to kill things that I don't want to kill. I know commercial farmers who are planting field corn, dent corn, they have it down. I mean, they plant, they get a mixture of Roundup and some other kind of, I forget the other variety, that they'll mix together in a sprayer and spray everything dead before they even plant. Or they'll do no-till planting, and then they have herbicide-resistant corn, so they'll come back and spray all the weeds dead after the corn starts to grow. I don't have that option here. So I don't know why this happened here, because this stand of corn up here looks beautiful by comparison. Yeah, there's some weeds, but I mean, look at this. This is this stalk of corn is about 6 feet high, you know, and it hasn't even tasseled yet. And this is a different variety. This is Honey Select, which is also a good sweet corn that I'd recommend. That's why I plant the two varieties. But as you can see here, this corn's done a whole lot better. Now, I planted this maybe a week or two after the other, but I did the same thing. I pre-emerged side dressing the with the fertilizer, but this corn managed to take off. I don't know what it is. It's all part of the same garden. I don't know whether there'd be more weeds in the ground down there than up here, but I got to figure it out. But you know, I'm looking forward to a decent corn harvest here. They haven't tasseled yet. We need to have rain when it's tasseling, or the ground needs to be wet for good pollination and good filling out of the cobs, you know, so that it puts kernels all the way to the end of the cob. But at this point, I'm not worried about it. We've had sufficient amount of rain, and if we don't get any rain, and we're supposed to get rain at the end of the week again, so if they start with tassels, then hey, I'll be fine. I won't have to do anything with watering. I didn't earlier, and I won't have to again. I have a few more crops up here. These first three are summer squash. I do have blossoms on them. They'll be coming. And then I have 3 hills of butternut squash. Those won't be due until, they won't ripen until, we're talking probably sometime late in September. And then I have 3 hills here I planted of zucchini. Again, last year all of these blighted right away. This year I'm doing a little better, but still the rain it's been too much. I planted a couple hills here, 3 hills here of spaghetti squash. They were a little later than that, and they got hit with more of the rain, so they're stunted. And then I also planted some more cucumbers here. I can't remember which is which, but I put four hills of pickling and 4 hills of slicing cucumbers here. They've got tons and tons of blossoms, but nothing yet. But then they were planted from seeds, and they were planted later, so well over planted for the pickling based on what I have below. But maybe, who knows, we'll see what happens. So at any rate, that's where we are with this upper garden here. So I'll come back to you, especially if I get a good sweet corn yield from these Honey Select. I'll show you what they look like later. And I don't know if I can salvage anything here with the nectar, but we'll see what happens. I'll try to get the string trimmer in at least and knock down some of the weeds if I can't get the tiller in. So we'll see what happens. And thank you for watching. I hope your summer gardening is going well for you, and that you're getting plenty of food for your family, preserved, whatever. Hey, this is all part of living out in the country, especially if you're trying to do it on a shoestring. So please like, subscribe. Thank you for your support, and we'll see you again.